Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from a neighborhood in Accra that is, well, we'll get into a little bit of that with my guest, but I'm in a lovely building that is very fitting for the work that my guest does. And I'll leave that in suspense, but it's a beautiful modern facility, which not to say that Accra doesn't have many of these, but given the kind of work my guest does, this is very fitting. So let's just get to his bio. He is a passionate technologist, entrepreneur, educator, and design thinking expert dedicated to building tech-driven solutions in emerging markets. With over 25 years of experience in software development, he has led teams to create award-winning innovative platforms that drive business and social impact. As co-founder and TCO of Yemachi Biotech, the YC21, he is working to build the most diverse genomic database to advance precision oncology. Previously, he co-founded Bloom Impact, led technology innovation at Ramin Foundation, and worked at Microsoft Research. His expertise spans fintech, health tech, and biotech with a focus on leveraging technology for meaningful change. David Hutchful, welcome to the podcast.
Good to meet you, Florence. Very glad to be here.
Yes, yay. So he did say good to meet me, but we met just recently at the Afro Talks dialogues, which happened on the eve of Africa Day. And we were both kind of on panels or in conversation about the future of work and what work is looking like. I gave my talk about the future of work, which is dovetailed with my salons. And David was on a panel speaking about real workforce development and the future of particularly skills development. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but that was a wonderful experience. Afro Talks, I'll put a link to it because I believe that it will be available to the public to see the talk. So let's get started. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Where I'm from. So I was born just up the street at the University of Ghana, Legon campus. So technically I'm from Accra, but being Ghanaian, my dad is from Apam. I was born in Apam in the central region. And my mom was born in Edukrom in the eastern region.
Hey,
yes,
we're from the same town.
We are? Oh,
yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And technically, the accounts at least are matrilineal, but Edukrom, which is one, tends to be patrilineal. So I'm from one of those sort of mixtures where we don't really technically have a place we align to. So I say I'm both from Apam and from Edukrom, but I was born and raised in Accra, so Accra boy.
What is your craft?
My craft, I'll say, is technology, and basically it's taken, and primarily digital technology. So I'm trained in software engineering, but I see it as a sort of a creative craft where you're pulling these digital bytes, zeros and ones together to, create new things that can help people do different things, entertainment, work, all of that.
Okay. I started to talk about this business and this building. Tell us about this neighborhood, number one, why you chose it, and a little bit more into what you're doing digitally now.
So the neighborhood we're in is Abelempe. It's one of the sort of old Accra neighborhoods. We're primarily here first because we found something that's in the price range. But I think, it's one of those neighborhoods that's beginning to gentrify a bit in terms of a lot of the older homes being changed into businesses. And, obviously some of them are being changed into high-rise sort of apartments to take more people. For us, the other reason why this is great is it's the close proximity to the university, where we have a lot of academic collaborations with them. And so it has us in this sort of really nice circle where we have access to the university and the resources it provides, but we are also in close proximity to town, where a lot of, sort of our business and the financial aspects of the business kind of, we have relationships there that we have to go to. I think the other nice thing too is because our work is primarily scientific research, being in a space where you can think and you can sort of, if you will, space out and get new ideas is important. So we are far away moved from the city that the hustle and bustle of it doesn't interrupt some of the thought work that we have to do.
Yeah, and it's quite quiet. And so you kind of answered a little bit of why the where, but I always like to ask why the where. How did you come to be living, working, and playing where you currently are? So we know why you're working here. So
Yeah.
tell us about the living and playing of Ghana, Accra,
Accra.
what have you. Yeah.
Right. I had the opportunity, obviously I was born, raised here, but I had the opportunity to live in other places, school in other places, but eventually decided to come back to Accra, come back to Ghana. I felt a pull. I was sitting, we'll probably get into this a bit, but I was sitting in a high level meeting in another country where they were speaking the local language of the country, and I was advising. And in the middle of it, I'm like, why am I doing this here? I could be doing this at home. I'd been out of the country for a while. So that sort of started sort of a chain reaction of me just looking for opportunities to come back, which I did. And at the point that I came back was right after sort of the African rising narrative was at its peak. And so everything seemed possible, particularly in Ghana. And so that's what I did. And when I first came back, because I didn't grow up as an adult here, I was primarily used to Accra, Tema. I think I'd been to Cape Coast once or twice. So my first mission was I want to know Ghana. And thankfully, the job I had took me all around the different regions. Got to learn a lot about, what was going on. The North completely blew my mind because my sort of image of it was so different from what I eventually encountered. Just beautiful, right? And then initially, my whole goal at that point was I want to get involved in government and kind of give back. And in hindsight, I say, thankfully, the job I had gave me enough opportunity and enough exposure to the government setting and working there, and very quickly realized that I don't think I could flourish in that environment. But thankfully, the part of the narrative where, that kind of spoke to everything is possible. It's hard, but it's possible. That part was true. And so that kind of kept me here. I tried different things. I'm currently on my fourth business. And so I tried different things, got involved in different efforts. I can get into more detail later. And they've all kind of worked really well and allowed me to grow and flourish. And that's what is actually keeping me here. Because one of the things that I've been lucky with is I've been able to maintain a lot of relationships and connections outside. And so, when things get hard here, you begin to look at those options and say, should I leave? Should I leave? But each time, that thought comes up and you even think about it, you realize that, just what I've experienced in this short, 10 years now, I've been back. It's been so rich and so rewarding that I do want to kind of stick with it.
Yeah. So you qualified it, the 10 years. So for those of the listeners that don't know when kind of the Africa Rising narrative was in its rise, you would say it was about 2015, 2016.
Actually, even before that, I'll say 2009 all the way kind of going to 2016.
Yeah. I would say I had a conversation with the guest that's on this week's episode, and we were talking about really the sweet spot was 2012, 2013, 2014. Yeah. That was when, we were just all in this renaissance, basically.
Yeah. I came back 2011, January 19th, started work January 20th, 2011. And it was just wonderful.
It was, and I moved end of 2012. So yeah, interesting. So tell us about what took you around Ghana. What was that work that you initially did here?
Before I moved back, I worked for Microsoft, so big, tech conglomerate. And so I wanted a bit of a change of scenery. But one of the things I really sort of picked up when I was at Microsoft was the power of technology to really change people's lives. So that was sort of the opportunity that I wanted to explore in Ghana. And thankfully, I got a job with the Grameen Foundation, which at the time was very much focused on using technology, especially in health, agriculture, and finance to uplift particularly the poor. So I moved back to Ghana and I was a director of the technology director for a health program that they were running in a country where we were trying to help pregnant women basically through the stages of pregnancy by providing information and making sure they were showing up for the antenatal care that they needed, and then post-birth the immunizations that they needed to get. And the first part of the project was in the north, actually in Upper East, Bogotanga at the time. And then we later did another extension in Utisanya, which is fairly close in the south. So in doing that, a lot of my work was basically visiting these clinics or chip centers that we have in Ghana, And these are the primary centers for healthcare, really understanding how the nurses worked, what their day-to-day life was, and then really working along the sort of the Ghana Health Service hierarchy at all levels, work with them. So at the district level, understanding what their challenges are, what their pains are, and then also at the national level. A lot of the work, apart from, building the system that would send out the messages to the women, was collecting the health data and making sure that the health service could analyze that and use that to improve the quality of care that was being given to the women. And so as you can imagine, that apart from, getting to go to a lot of different parts of Ghana and seeing the lives there, really, especially from a health perspective, that's kind of demonstrated to me that how precarious the health system in Ghana is. It's quite excellent at providing sort of primary care. And even at the most rural levels, the CHIP centers, I think have been well thought through, well implemented. And they are kind of things that other countries come to study, how to deliver care at the last mile. But as you begin to move up, and the care gets more complicated. We have the human resource, but we lack the infrastructure and the organization to make the delivery of the care work really well. And I think that's one of the sort of the scary things about still being here. You hear a lot of people say that apart from healthcare, I would stay around because you don't know how to, even in the very established clinics, do they have the depth and breadth of expertise to deal with a particular case, right? And for me, that has been something that has stuck with me in terms of, okay, how do we really, yes, we can do it at the last mile to some degree and do it well. And I think a lot of aid and NGO focuses on that last mile. But as they say, our middle class is expanding and all of that, those problems also exist at this level. And so how do we begin to address, those issues at that level that, yes, helps people who would be, say, in more rural peri-urban areas, but then people in the cities who are also facing these sort of more complicated issues. How do we have a system that supports that, in a sort of sustainable way?
Yeah. So I believe the nurses and midwives are on strike. And so with hearing what you're saying, by the time you finished that project or left there, what were your impressions about what you were leaving? And did that influence where you are now?
Yeah, greatly. And it wasn't so much the particular sort of health project we were on. I mean, what I got from that was just the sort of the resilience of the core staff we have on the ground, whether it's extension workers doing agriculture, it's nurses giving health, right? It's people walking around towns trying to provide financial services to market women. These people were resilient. They were, really looking to help, but the systems were not quite working. What I did leave with is being in an NGO space. And maybe I'll just give you an example. So the system we're building, we built to be able to send messages, SMS messages, USSD messages. Smartphones weren't quite big at the time, to these women. While we were building this, and this was being funded by the Gates Foundation, right? So I had over $1 million to build the system. And because I was interested in the technology ecosystem and how it was working, I was meeting quite a few people who were doing things on their own. And there were a couple of startup companies that were trying to do exactly the same. And they had challenges raising money. They had challenges getting into the public health system to be able to even run their applications, right? And so I saw this competition between NGO funded solutions and innovations and, people, little, young kids with their startups trying to do the same. And and that disillusioned me a bit because the other thing that I saw at least happen in the NGO field is the moment, it became, we had smartphones, they're like, okay, let's do this on smartphones. And then blockchain came, oh, let's move and do this on blockchain. So yeah, the goal was to solve the problem. But as the technology changed, people were just going for the new sexy thing.
Got it.
While some of the problems were still remaining static, right?
Analog, basically, yeah.
Yeah, and then we were killing it in terms of the ecosystem. These young guys who didn't kind of have the access and the money and all of that. And so the way I rationalized this was there's a space for NGOs, and it's in a space where, if there's no business model to support the aid or sustain the type of aid that's being given, then that's a perfect space for them. But there's this gap between where NGOs play and where sort of a more formal market type solutions play, where innovators can play. And we need to make that space more concrete and allow, provide the air for those, young guys who are innovating to be able to do that because they have a business mindset and they are not going to chase the new thing. They're going to make sure it keeps working and delivering so that they can get paid, right? So there's not going to be a lot of abandoned tech just because something new has come along and the money is requiring something new. So it made me a bit disillusioned about aid and how that helps. And that got me more interested in starting something on my own and sort of, trying to build solutions that would be long lasting beyond whatever the new tech wave is on, what funders wanted to fund at that point. So I moved into, and because of some of the work I'd done in finance, I was very interested in how small businesses get access to finance. So I was able to partner with a lovely lady to set up a company, Bloom Impact. And our goal was to basically help financial institutions find credible small businesses to lend to, and then to also make it easier for the way we used to describe it was almost like an Uber. As a small business, I could get on there and say, this is the money I need. This is where I am in terms of my finances or my job and all of that. And then the banks are the drivers who say, oh, this looks like a good person. And then they come for their person and provide the financing in that way. And so, I kind of switched fully, quit the job and kind of started my own business. And again, this is in the same vein of the Africa Rising, because part of the narrative was that, listen, there are a lot of things that you may be used to out in the West or wherever you were, and it's probably not been done here. And so there's an opportunity to explore that along with all the different problems that we had here, right? And so I made that jump to kind of start something on my own and address some of these problems that I was interested in.
Bloom Impact.
Yes.
Yes. So tell us a little bit more about kind of some of the impacts that you were really able to see, because when I think about where we still struggle is with institutions finding a way to trust that, they'll be able to get their returns, et cetera, et cetera. And, we know Bet on Africa has high returns, but what in your experience did you see were the obstacles that the financial institutions were kind of letting you know? And then how did you work with the companies?
Yeah, the Bloom Impact, our story there, I think for me was very eye-opening. And so, like I said, the initial goal is let's link up the small businesses to the banks, and basically let's de-risk these small businesses by helping them identify what would not make them attractive to a bank. So the process was, there's an app. You can download it. You can, then begin to give us information about, your bank statements, all of that. And then we had a system that would analyze it and say, and what we did was we onboarded a couple banks on there, and they all gave us their criteria for credit. And so we could compare where you are with them. And the goal was that if there was a match, that's the only time that we'll say, hey, you match this bank, and we'll tell the bank, there's this company looking for money that meets all your criteria, you can go. And so the goal was to shorten the time it took for a bank to even evaluate, because we would have done a bulk of that work. So in doing it, the first thing you realize is there are a lot of people doing very good business on the ground. I'll say, have a problem telling their financial story. And so that makes it very difficult for banks to find them. And initially when we started, we were dealing with commercial banks. So, Stan Chart, Stanbic, FNB, these high level tier one, if you would call them, banks. And it became very clear to us that what they considered to be small and medium in terms of size was not what we thought was small and medium, right? And so if you're thinking about somebody making between, 1,000 to 10,000, they were thinking 55,000 up, right? And so very quickly we had to change focus in terms of the banks we wanted to onboard. So we ended up finding the sweet spot of savings and loan banks. They seemed to go low enough and also high enough if that need was required. So that was the one thing we learned. There's just this mismatch between. And it makes sense, some banks, in terms of the effort and the cost of the effort, have to kind of do that math. And so once we realized the right type of banks, and now we started saying, okay, now we need to allow these guys to tell their financial story in a way that made sense. We started doing that. We got that right. And some of the banks were very proactive. They were looking for clients. And so they would, take the clients, they'll, do their assessment. One challenge we realized right away is that even though we had done a lot of the work beforehand, because of the way the regulation was set up, they almost had to redo all of it. And so in some ways, it minimized a little bit of the benefit we're giving to them. It was nice because they know that this person is qualified, they live where they say they live, all of that stuff. But they still had to redo a lot of the work. So that was one challenge in terms of the way the regulatory environment works there. The other thing we realized is we came across certain banks that, even though they probably pose themselves as being digitized, were not digitized in the operations, right? And so we are sending you leads on a portal that's complete on the web. You just have to log in, look at all the files, and then start making your calls. They would prioritize the paperwork that was in front of them, do all of that. And for the longest time, we weren't warning. So we started tracking, okay, how long is it taking the banks to respond?
Yeah.
Finding the ones that were taking too long, going in to try and figure out what's going on. And we realized, yeah, they say they're digital, they have emails and they have all of that, but
That's all they have.
they don't
Right.
operate digitally, right?
Wow.
So it became very clear that, and so where we started succeeding were places where we would place one of our own employees within the banks to like alert them that, hey, there's a lead here, and have it work. Those places, it worked really well, but it's not a scalable model. I can't employ people to set up banks all the time, right? So that idea, I think that was another learning, that even though, on the front, it seems like there's a lot of improvement, a lot of advancement in the use of technology, the human operations and mindset was not digital, at least digital first. And so that was a challenge. And I think for a lot of people who are doing startups or doing, especially tech-based startups, that's a challenge you run into, because you go a company that's doing really well, you want to partner with them, and you get in and you realize that, there's nothing to plug into, and you may have to build that from scratch. So that was another quick learning to, you have to look beyond the facade that, you see, and really understand how does a business operate if you're going to have a relationship with them. And then I'll say one other learning, and this was sort of a negative one in terms of the businesses, is that it seemed like when people do get loans, they treat it like they've won the lottery. And so it's almost like, I don't know how I did it, but you thought I have the money, I'm out, And so the banks really had legitimate reasons for being so risk adverse when it came to lending.
Yeah.
I mean, and you see it because with innovations like MTN's Quick Loan and other products that are there, they have a lot of people, so the demand for money is there, right? But the NPLs, I mean, they never reveal those numbers, but, very soon, there are people who you send money to regularly, and now you call them and they're like, oh, can I send it to this number? Oh, no, don't send it there. I owe them. So send it to this other number, right? So you can just anecdotally tell that.
Yeah.
So we do have this, I don't know if it's a cycle of behavior that these loans are not meant to be repaid. And so that was another challenge, where we're getting people loans and then they were thinking that's the end of the transaction, and then obviously the banks at that point are saying, okay, you're giving us good clients, but can you also be responsible for debt collection? Which, it's a whole business on itself.
Yeah.
And so that was another sort of learning, in that the agency and the people you're interacting with, there's a certain level of financial literacy that they require to be able to operate. And so that's one thing that we started building into the app and all of that, to make sure that there was that strong financial literacy component that allowed people, apart from, hey, learn how to keep your books, learn how to do that, is that if you do get a loan, you've got to manage it. It's for the business, it's for expanding. And I'll say the last one, and this is something that I think is important for even beyond the financial space, is we realized there were companies that were doing very well, but had no intention of growing beyond what they had. So you'd find a hairdresser who was, turnover, everything was really great. You're able to secure money for them. And then you're talking to them, it's like, you could expand. You could get more debt to grow your business. And they're like, nah, this is it. I'm cool. Right. And so that, sort of mentality that, well, I don't know what it is, but, we had, there's this sense that at least I had, that was like, hey, you're doing very well, scale up what you're doing, right? You don't have to be just a mom and pop store. You could be in multiple places because you're delivering. You figured out how to train people to do hair, how to get your customers coming back. You have the thing, and they're just like, I'm fine. And at some point we have to be people like me have to be comfortable and recognize that that's how some people want to run a business. That's the scale they want to keep it. And so if you want them to have kind of the positive environment, impact on the environment, you've got to find some other way apart from, hey, let's just scale and grow big.
Right.
Because
Because you're thinking of jobs.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I think sometimes the mistake we make, and I saw this even in the aid world, is we say scale, scale, scale. But scaling comes with, having to acquire different operational skills, management skills. And people who are doing well at this level might not know how to have that infrastructure and backup and resources to scale, and so when when that doesn't happen, then even the first instance fails because you stretched yourself too thin. Yeah.
Interesting. I really want to key on the idea of the lottery with the loans because I feel like it's cultural to a large extent. Because I look at people, my family, and everything. It's like they ask for it as a loan, but they never understand any obligation to pay it back. And so that's just, food for thought. But it has me thinking about culture and Glocal speak. So I'm asking for a word, a phrase, or a saying that's a meaningful part of your local experience. And why or how you come to value it as Glocal speak. And you did mention that you lived abroad and that you had certain experiences. So it could be there, it could be Ghana, but tell us about your Glocal speak.
I would say for me, so one thing that I really, what drives me, what gets me really excited is this sort of concept of what's called edge effects. So for example, you think about a riverbank, right? You have all these things happening on the land, kind of meeting up with the water world, and those edges, those spaces I always find interesting. So whether it's two different cultures coming together, two different academic disciplines coming together, I always feel like that's where growth and a lot of interesting things happen. And I think I've kind of spent my life kind of either chasing or trying to create edge effects. Like when I'm hiring for a team, I'm trying to find diverse skills because I want to bring them together. These interdisciplinary teams are what I love. That's what I thrive in, right? The sort of not downside, but the thing to be careful with that is you kind of have to always what makes you do well in those edge effects sort of environments is knowing who you are and what you're bringing, right? So for me, the word is probably the sankofa. So this sense of you want to be on a cutting edge progressive thing, but being very much aware of your roots, being very much aware of the wisdom, the traditions, the culture that has shaped you and has brought you there. And also I like to think, and I'm glad you kind of phrased it that way, because I don't like to think of the roots as being sort of static, although that's what makes it, powerful. But for me, for example, I lived in India for a bit with the Microsoft job. And it was, I learned so much from being in that culture. There's so much that's similar to what we have here, but parts that are very different, right? And I learned so much from that. I also spent time in the US, obviously, for school and all of that. And there's a lot that goes on there that I have found very useful, in terms of even my mindset, how I approach, how I see problems, all of that. And those are things I would like to carry with me as I go and I find new sort of spaces to operate in. And then obviously Ghana. For me, growing up here, I grew up on a university ground, and my siblings and I are always talking about this, and even with friends. And all we did was, I felt like we did schoolwork and everything, but we'll come home and we'll play and we'll make up games, and we'd go on little adventures and come back, and at 6:00 everybody runs up. And in some ways, you were if you are the adult in the thing, you were automatically responsible for everybody around. And so there were all these tactile skills that you learned, and you weren't doing it. It was in such a playful context, you didn't realize you were gaining it, right? Until later. And those have stayed with me. So not, people always get confused, but naturally I'm introverted. I like to just be myself and read and stuff. But the power of community, the beauty of community, because I grew up in a place like this, was kind of impressed on me. And so it's, understanding that you have to function in it. You have to, when I moved back, one of my immediate struggles, because I was staying with my mom for a bit, was my Saturdays were not mine anymore, because you're going to this wedding, you're going to this funeral, you're going to this thing, right? And eventually I had to learn to establish boundaries and spaces. But in the back of my mind, I understand that that's part of the social fabric. Like it's at some point it's important. So I pick and choose and make sure, I'm there, but I know when I have to show whether it's inconvenient or not. And those kind of, I think, and then obviously for me to in terms of spirituality, mostly from my parents, I'm a Christian, but that for me to, in a very weird way, it's tied to being in Ghana. I mean, I really struggle with the way Christianity is practiced in Ghana now. But I do believe that a lot of sort of our hope is tied to the way we've been able to make our faith real in our sort of our everyday life, right? Now, I think it's been distorted in a lot of different ways, and we could probably do a whole podcast on that. But I think that the core sense of, and even goes back to our traditional beliefs, that the sense that we are not here by ourselves, whether in the physical or in the spiritual realm, we have helpers, I think has been, for me, important in certain moments of my life, and being able to understand that you're part of something greater. And so when you're in trouble or whatever, you're going to have the support, but also that in terms of giving back, that you have, you have a responsibility, a duty to make sure that, and I think that spills not only into sort of, giving back to individuals or building something that would help children and things, but to things like the environment and all of that. We've got to leave something for somebody, right? Sankofa only works if somebody you can go back to something.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, long and short, I think for me that's the that'll be the word I go for. And I think the other important part is it's not just looking back, but they say the feet are facing forward. So it's that sort of you need to be progressive, right? And carrying all these important lessons and things you've learned with you.
Nice. So I usually reserve this until a later part of the conversation, but you've kind of inspired me to ask you now because you're speaking about mindset. And so what is your mindset hack?
Mindset hack. I'll say for me, it's curiosity. It's trying to be curious about everything around you, right? And even in particular about things that right? Or you think there are a lot of assumptions we make about everything around us. So for example, I had a guy, I was having issues with my AC, and I got this guy to come fix it, and then I was dropping him off at home, and it hit me, and I was like, listen, and it got ruined because the power had been going in and out, and I was like, is it possible to get an AC that doesn't run on electricity? And the guy's like, oh yeah, there are all these different things you can do. And I was like, oh, can you build one? And he's like, yeah, I can, but I will need some sort of electronic board, IC board that does XYZ. And I was like, why didn't you build that? And he was like, oh, that's only for the white person.
Hey,
he goes, unless the white man builds that, I can't do that, right? And my first instinct was to say, oh no, that's not thing. But then I was like, let me ask him why he thinks that's possible. And then just in conversation, it became clear that the only time he's seen anything done, it's been stuff that's been imported that he's seen. So even though there are people at Kenyan UST, at Legon, at Sheshi, all these other places who are messing around with IC boards, who are, okay, we don't produce them, but you can design them here, do all of that and get them printed for you to run. He had never seen that. And so in his mind, it's not possible. And so for me, the lesson there was, if you want to really encourage this sort of production at this level, really it isn't, hey, let's go, it's like you have to show these people the examples of it being done here. And I think that is across the board in different industries, that's what we lack. Yes. Is that people being able to, because sometimes I just spent some time at Casa Preco. I was doing this research. So part of us in Ghana, everybody has, I'd say galamsey work.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I tend to do is different research projects for different entities. So we're looking at commercialization of academic products. So, if you're in university, you come up with an idea. How has that been happening? What's stopping it from happening? And Casa Preco is one example where you've had successful transfer of, knowledge into research knowledge into a product that's doing really well. And sitting there and just talking to them, the number of things that company does, I just went in there thinking, they create a automobiles and a couple, drinks. The span of the work they do is so impressive. And the clients and the people they serve is so impressive. But unless people look, you don't see it. So you'd probably go somewhere and say, in Ghana, we don't do that. Right. But there are people in different fields providing such niche, highly scientific services that people don't know about. And as a result, like even if you come to know about it, you think you have to leave Ghana to be able to go and engage in it, right? To bring it back a little to what we're doing here at Yamachi, I mean, it's very similar. We are, I mean, to put it crudely, we are mining, but a very different sort of mining. So the main problem we're trying to deal with is cancer. So we're a cancer research company, and cancer is a genetic disease, which means the problem is mutations that have happened in our genes. And so the way people have been treating it is doing what's called precision medicine. So you're targeting very specific changes in people's genes with medicines or therapeutics, right? The problem is the cancer gene, even though the human cancer genome has been sequenced, so we know most of it, the data in there is actually majority Caucasian. Mm-hmm. And so the number of Black people represented in that data set is around 2%. And the Black people in there are actually mostly African Americans. And their gene set, even though it's similar to us, is what's called, it's not the African gene, right? And so basically we are completely underrepresented in the human genome information that we have, which means you can't create drugs and things that will. So our first goal is to basically generate that database that includes the African gene pool in the data that we have. And that's why I call it mining, because to do that, you literally have to get people's blood and samples and all of that. And obviously we do that in all the ethical ways that are required. And our goal is to collect that information and then, with the new machine learning and AI and all of that, be able to generate the insights from it that will allow us to identify, okay, for this Black woman with breast cancer, it's not caused by what we know is causing breast cancer in white women, but because of this other mutation. And then we can create drugs and all of that for them to address it. And to do this work, it's quite expensive and requires a lot of sort of high technical skills. And we do that, and we're doing that here in Accra, right? And our investors and everybody is always surprised when they find out that that kind of work is going on the continent, right? And much less in Accra. So in some ways, we need to get better at telling our stories. We need not only to the outside people, but to ourselves, so people know the skill, the ability, all of that exists here.
I think that's wonderful. I'm glad you segued into Yamachi Yamachi.
Yamachi.
What does it mean?
So it's a Portuguese word. So is, and I have to get this right because I get confused myself. I believe is a Hausa word for health. Amachi is health or good health in a way, I believe. And then Machi is obviously morning in Twi Akan. So what we stand for is a new dawn of health in Africa. So Machi. Yeah. A new dawn for health.
So the information you're collecting, so are you in partnership with more universities or more research centers across Africa, or right now you're focused in Ghana and then you're building from there?
The challenge of trying to build the African genome, as we call it, is that you have to be in Africa or the different countries. So we're headquartered in Accra, Ghana, and we're collecting, we've partnered with, and it's mostly academic institutions and also clinical partners. So the hospitals that actually see the patients. So we have that in Accra. We have an office in Kenya as well, in Nairobi. Where we also have some relationships, and then we're in 9 different places. So then in Tunisia, Ivory Coast, I think Senegal, and in these places we don't have offices, but we have relationships with either hospitals or things, and obviously Nigeria. Nigeria is a big one too.
Wow, I'm so amazed, and that's why I'm so interested, because this science piece is where I feel like we're really falling down, and now, in light of knowing what's going on in the U.S., this huge science center, and they're really, killing the sector. I just see this opportunity for, first of all, drawing talent to do that work. The big question mark is, how do we fund that research and the facilities? Because I think that's where even our universities cannot support the kind of research that many of these professionals would want to come, and researchers want to come and do. So you have kind of cracked that nut a little bit,
We're
right?
cracking it.
You're cracking it. And so what would you say has been part of that silver bullet to get to a place where you have proof of concept that has attracted the type of investors that you have.
Yeah. And I think like in all sort of either startup companies and stuff, it's the silver bullet is the hard work.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that is the hard work of actually, demonstrating that you can do what it is that, you're saying you're going to do. And then I think the next important point is being able to tell the story about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, the work, our work was cut off for us. First, we had to show that we could set up a lab and kind of do the genetic sequencing that needed to be done. We got not lucky, but we got a very nice opportunity because we started the lab just when COVID hit. And so we strategically decided that we would sequence COVID or do COVID testing, which they were using PCR machines. But at that point, we were able to strike up a relationship with the University of Ghana. We did COVID, two things. We were doing the COVID testing here, which, gave our team the opportunity to, use the tools, learn, practice, helped us establish relationship with the suppliers for the different reagents and all of that we needed. And then the second thing we did was we signed up to do a research study called Heritage. What COVID presented to the whole world was an opportunity to do a natural experiment, because it was the first time that people all around the world, for one reason or another, were taking the same drug, right? And so there was a cohort of people in England who were taking the AstraZeneca vaccine. And so we also created a cohort here who were taking the same vaccine. And we kind of just followed along to understand, okay, what was the impact? What was the response, immune response to the vaccine that came in. And we just actually published a paper on that. I'll share that with you. That's kind of talked about why we as Africans responded better in some ways to the vaccines than some of the populations that were outside Africa. Well, this was a Ghana study, so the Ghana study. But doing that project really allowed us to demonstrate to then outside research institutions and all of that we do have that scientific capacity to carry on scientific research and work. And very soon from that, we got involved with other research projects, generating data, analyzing it, publishing, being able to, and that, when we went to people, it showed that, oh yeah, they can do the work. And that's good because as an African entity, there's just so much against you. And so being able to prove that you can do the work is good. But it doesn't mean that's the end of your struggle, because then the next big thing, especially for investors that are not on a continent or don't have much context, are like, how do you keep the lights on? How do you deal with power? How do you deal with power? And it may get annoying to have to explain over and over again, why you do that. But it's important because, for somebody to give you money, and we're doing, biotech, and it's a very sort of costly enterprise, right? They need to feel comfortable. They need to know that there's a high chance that they would get their money back in some form. So you need to be able to tell that story and make it clear that these are things we funded. And for us, that's part of our selling prop to the biotech world, is that there's now a realization that this missing gap of African data in the genome is actually a big problem. Because, for example, places like the US, the population is diversifying so much that, even if insurance is paying for cancer care, you're paying for cancer care now of Black people that you don't have any data to know how to take care of, right? And so even for their own populations, they need to have this information. Now, how do you get it from Africa? How do you, sort of deal with all the nuances of working on this continent? And so that's part of the value we bring, to say the expertise we bring, the experience we bring working in Ghana, working in all these contexts, in the different health contexts, kind of makes it easy for you then to be able to benefit from the insights that will be generated from this.
So who is your customer?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So, we have the way we like to think about this is, obviously our final customer is the African, right? We want them to benefit from the research we do, so that eventually the drugs and everything that are created are accessible and available to them to use. But they are not paying for what we do. So in that sense, they're not a customer because they don't pay for it yet. Right. So our immediate customer then is either big pharma or biotechs that are looking to use sort of the insights from the data that we are generating to improve the work that they're doing. So, for example, there was actually it was Singaporean, but they were based in San Francisco, that were creating sort of liquid biopsy based tests for doing detections. And they had tested it everywhere and run it, but they never tested it in Africa, so they didn't know how to do that, how to go about proving whether it was the efficacy of it. So we were able to help them do that with the data we had, and then obviously the links and the resources that we had here. And so, and obviously they paid us to be able to run that. So those are the type of clients that we have, biotech companies or pharma companies that are looking to do the same within the oncology space.
Right. If you were to think about your ideal scaffold of the ecosystem that then can carry this business in Africa, what would it look like?
So ideal. The first thing is the work. So Yamachi, our sort of big vision eventually is to be doing drug discovery. Right now, we can't do that because the data just doesn't exist. So we are, if you will, more of a data biotech than a biotech. But we will get where we want to go. The reason why a company that wants to be a biotech in the US who would have started out the same way we did would not be a data company first is because that data exists. And that data was primarily paid for by government money that went into different research organizations. So for me, in the ideal space is that we would have enabled our governments to fund scientific research at an appreciable level. So not just sort of, in cancer oncology, but all types of scientific research in academic institutions and other private research institutions, right? So that would be sort of a layer that I think is important to get it going. Then I think second, we would need companies like ours. So the good thing is, and for example, in Ghana, we have WACBIB, which is a center at the University of Ghana that is training people to be, basically in the space, to be lab technicians, to be bioinformaticians, right? And so we're getting the people, but the moment they graduate, they have to go out and work because there's no, there's only Yamachi for now and, a couple other companies. So the goal is that there'll be more of us here who will be able to absorb that talent, at least for the initial one of our first 1 or 2 years, give them the experience, also gain from them before they go off to get a PhD or whatever. But ideally, even they'll do their PhDs here, right? And so that because what happens is when you go out to do research, your problem space may not always be relate back to the place you originated, right? We do have quite a few people who go and study like tropical diseases and all of that are here, but there's so many other problems. And so if you go do a PhD and it's being funded by somebody and he's studying something that has to do with Eskimos, that's what you're gonna do, right? And so I think that pipeline of talent and then that pipeline of having places where this talent can go and at least initially hone their skills would be important in terms of the framework. The good thing is, in terms of intellectual property and all of that, it's actually quite well established, or at least being put in place, both at the university level and at sectors like this. Like, we have lawyers in Ghana you can go to who can help you manage your intellectual property quite well. So in some ways, we've built some pieces of the infrastructure and put it in place, but some of the core elements don't exist. And for me, I think it's a matter of time. But I think one of the biggest catalysts for this would be government being able to fund some money into science. And I always say that when we always talk about, government has to do this, government has to do this. But even when you look at the US, majority of things coming out of private, research institutions and even public hospital, public research, all of that is funded by the government. Even biotech, like big pharma work that's been done, is funded by government money, right? So to use science, if we say we want to be a science-driven, data-driven, AI-driven economy, we need to put in the resources. It's just as much as, hey, we need to put in a cocoa road here. You need to be able to fund the science in the country so that you can kind of benefit from that. The other pieces will come together. And I think those other pieces you do need, like private companies, it's got to be people like us who go find private money to grow ourselves. markets, all of that. The private sector needs to create that, but that initial research money, I think there needs to be greater play from the state in that.
So you have me thinking about the AI of it.
Yes.
Yes. I was listening to Democracy Now! And a woman who wrote a book about, I think it was AI revolution or something. I'll get it in the show notes, but it's about Sam Altman.
Yeah.
And the potential dangers of what this AI movement is moving towards, particularly because, as we know, just as you mentioned, most of our most innovative science is funded by the US government and then governments, but the US government in particular. And so even OpenAI started that way and is still kind of trying to leverage those relationships to continue to contract with them. And so then that compromises to a large degree what we feel like is our own sovereign access to our information, et cetera. And so when you're a biotech, and biotech can thrive on AI. It's obvious. I mean, we know healthcare is one of the best applications for AI. Where do you feel like the ethics of it now lies in our African context, or just globally, but generally, definitely that?
With AI, especially with from an ethics perspective, there are different, if you will, phases of AI as we know it now, where that is relevant. The first is everything that AI is able to do is because of the data it has, right? So I'll use us as an example. We use AI to sort of generate the insight, at least parse the data that we get to generate the insights. But we have to get the data, and there are two types of data we're looking at, both clinical data, so clinical history, all of that, and then the genomic data. In collecting the clinical data, we just need to make sure that people, both. We just need to make sure people know what it is we're collecting from them and what we're going to use it for. So for us, all the collection is done within a context of a research project, and there are quite well-established procedures for that, right? IRBs, all of that. And then, we get the informed consent that they have to allude to. So that's good. We need a replica of that in all the other verticals in which we plan to use AI, where people need to have a very good sense and control. We've seen what the Europeans are doing with GDPR. Thankfully, a lot of African countries have derivatives of GDPR, or at least they've taken that, they've localized it. Ghana has a pretty good one. And I think in Africa, actually, it's growing, but it's good because each country is getting their own, and also they're making it interoperable. As in, if I am collecting data, for example, in Zimbabwe, or in Kenya, they have rules that obviously you de-identify and do all of that. But they say if you're moving into a country that has something as similar sort of policy as we do in terms of how you manage and handle data and all of that, then you're allowed to do it, right? So it's important that these structures are put in place, across the continent, but definitely in the country. But they are also enforced, right? I do get a sense, and I mean, the Ghana's Data Commission has done really well. But in the way in which I've interacted with them, sometimes I feel like they're more interested in the revenue generation aspects of it, like come and register, renew your registration. What I do between registrations is not, until something goes wrong, it's not, a key concern. But, coming back to your question, I think that sort of what they have in the scientific world in terms of being able to get consent from people before their data is used in any sort of key way needs to be there to maintain and make sure that it's been ethically collected. Now, the next step is how you processing and using the data. And this is where, at least as the technologists or as whoever the data scientist people, you need to make sure there are no biases in there, right? Yamachi, the big problem we're trying to solve is the bias of, no African data in there. You come to the Ghana context. If, for example, we were building some system that was going to do school allocation or whatever after BEC, would have to make sure that the data that's feeding that is not biased in any way against any of the people from different parts of Ghana, right? And so being conscious about any kind of bias that may sip into the data part is important. And then once, you kind of get beyond that, then there's the application of it. And this, the application part is where, one of the great things I learned from he was my boss, but kind of a mentor at Microsoft, was technology is only as good as it's only as good or bad as the people who use it, right? In itself, it doesn't hold any inherent, good or bad, right? And so that's where, sort of the education comes in. Like, how do I use AI in a manner that, where I'm aware that the way I'm using it doesn't harm others, right? And so if, I'm trying to find a good example, if I'm in charge of national security or, whatever, I don't sit there and then decide to use the AI tools to detect every time people in the opposite party have run a stoplight so I can find them,
Yeah,
right?
right, right, right.
And I think, from a technology perspective, you train people to be aware of that so that they don't, they don't do that, but you also have to then put in the safeguards to catch them when they do, because people will always be people. And so I think in terms of the ethics of AI, those are, some ways in which we can begin to think about ensuring that, we're at least, not straying to the wrong side. And I keep thinking, for me, it will keep evolving because AI system, I mean, just in the last 2-3 years, the capabilities that they have, as with all new technologies, push people to encounter new paradigms that they've not experienced before. And we may not have laws, we may not have established norms and traditions on how to deal it. And for us, I think as human beings, the goal would be to become aware of that and have processes, means of being able to, at that point, then determine, how to ameliorate whatever negative effects that might be having. I mean, AI is definitely very powerful, but you start looking at things like even like the TV when it was first introduced, and how, educationists were all really worried because everybody's just going to sit at home and watch TV and do that. Even probably mobile phones are more dangerous than AI at the moment, right? In terms of the impact, the content that shows up and all of that, and the impact on our young people, right? But it always boils down to a combination of human intervention to control the things, and then making sure that the design of the technology itself bends towards good, as opposed to.
I like that you started on this human side. You also are a co-founder of an organization, Ahaspora, which is about bringing people together.
Yes.
And so tell us about Ahaspora, how it has evolved and how you came to be a part of it.
Yeah. So Haspera, so Cristobal Datsy, who was sort of the founder. There were a couple of us, but she had the idea and she drove it. I remember very clearly we were sitting at plus 233 now. Nice jazz bar in Accra if you're ever around. And we're just talking, and there are a couple of us that had come back, and there was a sort of I guess a sizable number of people who knew each other in DC, and then through family networks and all of that. So we used to meet up. And like we said, the heydays of the Africa Rising. So after work, everybody was going to meet each other, having fun. And so she threw an event, had a little gathering at her house, and we all came, and we realized most of us had decided to move back to Ghana. We had been trained primarily in the US, but from all over outside Ghana, and had decided to move back to Ghana. Some people had led very lucrative jobs. People had moved from industries that didn't even exist in Ghana, but had come here because they wanted to start things. And the main thing that brought us together was we realized that our mindsets had changed. And it was causing us a lot of friction with trying to operate in Ghana, right? And on our own, you would think you're the crazy one, right? Because you're like, why isn't everybody seeing that, throwing this thing here every day and leaving trash on the side doesn't make sense? Or crossing the red line when is like, why, but then eventually we found each other and realized that, oh, you're not alone. What you're thinking is not actually, off the rails, right? But I think the other important thing was we had people in Ahaspora who had either left and gone and had been back for a while, or had not even left Ghana, but kind of had that global mindset, and they were able to balance out sort of quote unquote righteous indignation, and kind of bring perspectives to some of the things, right? And gaining that perspective, I think, allowed a lot of us to ride out and understand how to operate in this space. And so that was what Haspera primarily initially started was this kind of, if you will, social and physical social network. I, I hate the fact that we have to say physical social
Well,
network.
that's what I was getting at, right? It's like this
Yeah,
was
yeah.
about meeting.
Meeting,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but it allowed us then to sort of learn from each other, address the challenges we're having. Obviously, on the listserv, it allowed people to find resources, find jobs, all of those, which were really keen. Very quickly, we got to a point where we realized that we had to give back. And then, the motto for Haspera is actually here to matter. Right. So it's good that we've found a network that allows us to, assimilate, to reintegrate into Ghana and stuff. But we had to be on a proactive leg of giving back. And so we started a mentorship program. One thing we realized is there quite a lot happening with people at a university level who are graduating. But we realized that, at a high school level was really important because that's, to tell people you have options. You don't have to go and read science. You don't have to go and read this because that's all you've done, right? So catching them early became important. We set up a mentorship program around that. We also started doing some sort of if you will, social CRS type stuff, giving back to communities, going back. So we have the LECMA community that we work with quite a bit, setting up a school there, giving them the resources to run. That is sort of the core for Haspera. But the ethos of it really is there's a role that people who've had the opportunity to leave Ghana, who have come back, there's a very important role that they have to play. And I think part of the ethos is to say, yes, we realize that it's not the ideal, because I think what happens to us sometimes when we go out is you begin to romanticize Ghana, right?
Yeah.
And especially when you're in the US and you only come for those 2 week holidays and you leave right away. Yeah, right.
Great
so
parties,
it's
all
like,
that stuff.
Ghana,
Yeah.
but then when you stay 1 month, 2 months, the reality hits you and then it becomes difficult, right? But to acknowledge that difficulty and then say that there's still a path to give back. And the path can be either you end up going into public service and stuff, which I think at this point we're all still very, very sort of tempted. We don't know how to do that. We haven't figured that part out, right? But in sort of either private enterprise or even going into existing companies here and bringing sort of that more of entrepreneurship mindset of, listen, we need to think globally about the way our work processes, the way we approach our clients, all of that, bringing that to bear. When enough of us are back and are doing those things, either in our private businesses or things, that is then we go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it's going.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. I am a member, or am I a member? I'm on the listserv, so I haven't been active because I've been back and forth. But
we have a lot of nurkers.
Yeah, I know.
Which is fine. I'm one of them.
Right, right. But you had vision, so that's where it started. Okay, I know I just get you back to your day. I want to just ask you what's new and next for Yemachi, and then I want to ask you also what you do in your leisure time. Are you a reader, a watcher, or a listener? And what are some of your favorite reads, watches, or listens?
Okay. Good. Thing that we're starting to work on. Yeah, very excited. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we're working on that. So in terms of, I think for mine, so I mean, at the core, when I was younger, I was a reader. I was the kind of guy who was leaving my food underneath my bed and my parents would have to come and take it because I was just in there reading the Hardy Boys or Nancy and getting through all the series. And I couldn't leave the room until I was done. Now I read more, but it ends up being technical journals and all of that. I really need to get back to nonfiction. So I'll say right now I'm more of a watcher. I like documentaries. I like, sort of police and whodunit type series. So Netflix is great for that because you just kind of sit and chill and do that. And I just finished one called Department Q, which was a police type thing. But yeah, yeah. And what I like about Netflix is the diversity of shows there, because it's like you never think about, hey, Poland make movies? So I'm watching all these and it's interesting to see
exactly
two things. One, just their local cultural things, what's happening, but also just the huge influence on Hollywood and filmmaking in all these disparate places, right? My daughter loves these Korean movies and I watch them sometimes with her and I'm just like, why are they trying to be like Americans? Why, It's true. And I mean, yeah, I guess that's the power. So yeah, that's watching. And then now I guess I do a lot more podcasts. the different kinds of, I love football, so there are football ones, and then and all that. So that's the watching that. The other thing is I love to learn new skills. I try to gain a new skill every year. So the latest one I learned, which was probably a year and a half ago, was riding a motorcycle. So that was great because it really opens up Ghana to you. You can get up in the morning and go somewhere. And I know it's dangerous and all of that. And not officially. There are a couple bike clubs I ride with, but I haven't joined one officially. So I have an Yamaha XSR 900. So it's sort of if you will, like a street bike type thing. I'm toying with whether I get a GS, which is an adventure bike. So that means you can really go do things, or a Harley, which is the retirement bike. Yeah,
right?
just cruise around around Accra and all of that. So and obviously trying to get new skill means you always end up you're doing something, different, or you're going places. And then I think the basis, I love experiencing cultures, food and stuff. So travel is my thing. When I get an opportunity, I go somewhere new, interact with the people, try to be a local, all of that stuff. So yeah, I'll say those are my main things.
Nice. I love it. You're the first person who's been the motorbike person, so we'll have some tips for those who want to figure out which bike to start with.
Oh yeah.
And
there's a great community in Accra for that as well.
Yeah.
They're very passionate about it. We have women riding clubs.
Yeah, I've seen over behind Legon. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I learned.
Yeah.
That's because I had a couple skills that the technical term they use is buying land. So I have quite a lot of land in Lagos from flying off the bike.
Yeah. But you're all safe, so that's important.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, David, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, for your story, for your work. It's awesome. Keep up the good work. And do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners before we sign off?
Yeah. I'll just say, for me, the things that I've found to be really, both in my life, but generally being in Ghana, is this sort of balance between focus and curiosity, right? Be very curious around, the people around you, like what's going on in their lives, what's happening, things that are happening, events, all of that. Be curious about them, but also be able to maintain focus, because that's what moves you forward. I always tell young entrepreneurs in Ghana that once you find an area you want to work in, you realize that there are so many things that don't work that you want to basically build things along the value chain to make it work. And sometimes that's what you have to do, right? But you shouldn't do that at the expense of focus, because otherwise you don't go far. You don't get any traction. So that balance of focus and curiosity, I think, will lead you always to interesting places.
Great. Wonderful last thoughts. So stay focused, folks, but always be curious. All right, listeners, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspa.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, bye for now.